Tonight on Primetime Politics, rallying his caucus.
We're united to serve Canadians, and we will build this country.
Mark Carney addresses his Liberal MPs for the first time since winning the party's leadership race. Coming up, we'll speak with the Labour Minister Steve MacKinnon. We'll get his take on Carney's first day on the job and ask what was said ahead of an expected election. Also,
he put his profit ahead of our people, and he did exactly what Donald Trump wanted.
Our political strategists will give us their take on the opposition reaction to Carney's win, and we'll speak to Pollster Dan Arnold about a new survey that measures how Canadians feel about the new Liberal leader. Plus,
I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Ontario slaps an export duty on electricity to the U.S. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. The newly elected Liberal leader made his way to Parliament Hill today. Mark Carney talking transition with the Prime Minister and to meet his new caucus to discuss priorities as the country comes ever closer to an election call.
I went to caucus today because you start as you mean to go on. And we are a Liberal team, and so it's incredibly important for me to hear directly from the members of caucus the concerns of Canadians on the ground, their priorities. As I said last night, they're the voices of their communities and they're the conscience of the party. There's tremendous energy in that group. We know this is a crucial time for our country. We're united to serve Canadians, and we will build this country.
Well, Steve MacKinnon is the Minister for Employment, Workforce Development and Labour. He was in the meetings today. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Mr. Carney, arguably more blue Liberal than the progressive wing that Mr. Trudeau represented. Is that a pivot your caucus is ready to make?
I think, I don't know that I would paint Mr. Carney any color of Liberal other than red. He is a true Liberal, which means, of course, that we want to keep a focus on the economy, but we also want to do so that Canada can sustain and project the kind of values that we've always projected, looking after one another, having a strong safety net under people, looking after having single-payer health care for all Canadians. Those are the kinds of things that, those are the kind of outcomes from the work that we do on achieving a strong economy. I think that's the kind of Liberal Mr. Carney is.
So concretely then, what type of change will he bring to the party? Or is this just a change at the top, but the status quo beyond it?
Oh no, look, there will be absolutely a change in emphasis, a strong focus on wealth generation, prosperity generation for Canadians, on creating the kinds of conditions where the country can prosper, whether that's through building infrastructure, whether that's through diversifying trade markets, whether that's through standing up to Donald Trump. Mr. Carney, I think, will absolutely have that real focus on economic questions and the kind of ways that we go about achieving prosperity in this country. And that'll be quite a contrast, Michael, with our opponents. You know, people who talk the country down, people who share Mr. Trump's values and not the values of Canadians over the years. So we're going to put that on display, and I think that Mr. Carney will come out very, very well in that comparison.
But is that also a contrast against Mr. Trudeau's prime ministership? You know, again, he being more progressive, less concerned about the deficit, for example. Is this a turning of your back on the priorities set out by the outgoing prime minister?
Well, Michael, your first question is this a change? And then the second question is, why are you changing? Of course, there's a change of seasons. Of course, we must adapt to the times. The times call for
But is this a turning of your back on Mr. Trudeau's policies?
Well, of course not. We've achieved an amazing legacy. Child care, the Canada Child Benefit, families have benefited from very much from Mr. Trudeau's years in office and so many others. We're not turning our back on that at all. But it is time that we focus on the prosperity of Canadians. It is time we focus on building the country and the kind of infrastructure we need to put a foundation under the future prosperity of Canada. And it's time to stand up to Donald Trump. And Mr. Carney will be doing that because he's strong from having had the experience of the global financial crisis, the Brexit crisis. Mr. Carney has been battle tested, and he'll I know, guide us very, very well through these incredibly tumultuous times.
Now, Mr. Carney himself said today that a transition would happen quickly. So I wonder, is a swearing in, a cabinet shuffle possible as early as Wednesday?
I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to be very helpful to you there, Michael. I think that those are decisions that Mr. Carney will make. Obviously, he's conveyed that he will make them quickly, and I think we'll all learn them at the same time.
Okay. You know, before we're done, I do wonder, because the question's now being asked in many quarters, because here you are, you're going to be in the midst of a campaign sooner rather than later by all indications. How can you govern, fight Donald Trump, and campaign at the same time without compromising one or the other?
Well, we have to have an election. I don't know that anyone's seriously suggesting that in a world where the three opposition parties are conspiring to bring down the government, I don't know that really there is a world where an election in the near future, whenever that might be, can be avoided. So I don't know really what the question is. Of course we will tackle Donald Trump. Of course we will uphold Canada's interests. Of course we will do all of that and more at the same time while asking Canadians for their support.
Okay. Minister MacKinnon, thank you very much for the time this evening.
Thank you.
So a promise to work hard from Minister MacKinnon and a message of positivity, but not so positive and not surprisingly, the reaction we heard today from Mr. Carney's opposition colleagues.
If Mr. Carney was to start an election in the coming minute, let's wait. We're ready. Let's go.
One of the first things he promised to do is a tax cut that mostly helps millionaires. Right. He is telling you who he's in it for. That tax cut is to change or to reverse on the capital gains changes. So he wants to give an advantage that's mostly going to help millionaires and a very small percentage of Canadians.
He's the guy that sold out to Trump. 6 days after Donald Trump threatened Canada with tariffs to steal our jobs, Mark Carney announced to Brookfield shareholders that he would move his headquarters from Canada to New York. And when you asked him about it, he lied to your face. We got it in writing, and we proved it. He sold out Canada.
Well, let's bring in our political strategist now, Susan Smith, former Liberal strategist, co-founder and principal at Blue Sky Strategy Group, Cole Hogan, conservative digital strategist, principal at GT, and George Soule is a former director of communications for the federal NDP. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
So listen, we just heard Pierre Poilievre today essentially reacting to Mark Carney's win by reminding us once again about Brookfield raising the issue of moving the head office from Toronto to New York. So when it comes to fighting Donald Trump, he questions the credentials of Mark Carney on that level. Is that going to be the millstone around Mark Carney's neck?
I heard Pierre Poilievre on his heels and a man who's worried about his worst nightmare taking place. For Poilievre, he wanted to fight an election against Trudeau on axing the tax, and Canada is broken. Trudeau's gone. The tax is going to be axed. Trump is present in tariffs, and Mark Carney's been elected. So Pierre Poilievre is trying anything he can to distract from the momentum, enthusiasm, and credibility around Mark Carney. I don't think that's going to work. I think people are, when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to make up their minds, they're going to look at Carney's track record in the business world. Maybe there's lots of good things, maybe the odd thing that he'll have to do a better job of explaining, but on the whole, it's a career understanding finance and working to make things better and help economies versus a guy who's been working in question period for 26 years.
Except that the Conservatives keep honing in on this message. So the research must be showing that it's working, Cole.
Yeah, I think Mark Carney is going to have to come up with some sort of answer at some point on Brookfield. Like, clearly he did have some involvement in the decision to move the office from, Toronto and Canada to New York. And, on the issue of Brookfield and on the issue of the financial disclosures and any potential conflicts of interest, this is something he's going to have to find a definitive answer on, because we've seen him say before, why should I do more than what anyone else has in terms of disclosures? Like, well, you're the Prime Minister designate now. Your standard should be higher than everyone else's.
That's not what he said. He said, when it's time for me to do it, I'll do it. And he also indicated that he was working on having all that disclosure done. I expect that to come now that he's been elected. What he also has done is filled out the paperwork for his security clearance, which Mr. Poilievre, despite being opposition leader for 2 years, has not yet done.
Which Mr. Carney raised on stage yesterday, so they too know what they're hitting at. George, what do you make of this? Do you think Brookfield's going to be a bigger issue than it is? Not that it's not a concern at this moment in time.
I mean, I'll start by saying that if we can have an election based on security clearances or paperwork filled out, then I'm feeling pretty good about our chances in the NDP. Let those two argue about that paperwork all day long, and I don't think Canadians are going to be there. And I do think there are valid concerns. I think there's valid questions. One, why is Pierre Poilievre refusing to get his security clearance to find out what's going on with foreign interference? And absolutely, why is this guy not more honest about having a key role in moving, a major company, their head office from Toronto to the United States? And especially right now with what's going on with the tariffs, I think that's a big deal. But I do, again, think that all of that only matters if they make that argument about being there for people, right? So being someone who's backed billionaires and moved companies to make more money does say maybe his priority isn't with me and average workers. And so I think that's a legitimate concern. But I think the way Pierre Poilievre's doing it, I think it's just going to continue to hurt him, because again, it looks like he's the nerd in the corner doing procedural arguments. And I understand it, because I think they have had a campaign they've wanted to run for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're not going to be able to run that campaign now, and I think they're scrambling.
Yeah, scrambling, and as we said earlier, the ballot box question seems very much it's going to be about Donald Trump time and again. And what's interesting is we are now expecting an election call sooner rather than later. And if that is the case, we are looking at April the 2nd in the middle of a campaign where Donald Trump is going to announce his counter tariffs on countries all around the world, including Canada. How does that figure out for the party, Susan? How do you think that will benefit or not benefit certain players?
Mr. Carney will be sworn in as Canada's Prime Minister by then, and I think we'll see the difference between, I heard Pierre Poilievre today bragging that he's been studying the books for the last little while. Well, Mr. Carney has actually been involved in his career on helping to make policy decisions, design policy, and implement it, and that's a whole lot different than studying the books. Mr. Carney also has the network around the world that can help Canada shape and implement a response. And Mr. Poilievre's been studying the books. So I don't want Canada to be hurt by whatever Donald Trump does, but whatever moves Trump makes Poilievre's narrative even more difficult, I think.
Yeah. What do you say to that, Cole?
I think during a general election, we're going to see who the better political athlete here is. I think Mark Carney, during the leadership campaign, had some problems with saying one thing and then another. He said he'd use emergency powers to move a pipeline through Canada, but not through Quebec if they don't want it. He said Canada's economy was weak and then strong. He said he worked for Paul Martin when he didn't. Like, the Liberal leadership campaign was not a church basement campaign, and Mark Carney's going to have to actually hit the hustings, and we'll see how well he can actually perform against Pierre Poilievre.
George?
Well, again, I think a lot of this is just kind of a conversation that is missing the whole point, right? I think, the tariffs that are coming in have nothing to do with fact, and so whoever knows how to deal with that best doesn't really matter. What matters is how much people think they can handle Donald Trump best, because whoever makes the best argument isn't going to win this. It's whoever can stand up to him most, and whoever has the ability to unite Canadians best. And right now, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but right now it's clear that most Canadians don't trust Pierre Poilievre to do that. They just don't. And so if Mr. Carney can earn that respect and that opportunity, then that'll be good for him. He hasn't done it yet, so we'll see. But I think that, again, that's the real challenge, because the facts don't matter. If, like, really quickly, just one small example that's really stuck out to me lately is as Trump goes after, saying that they don't need Canada's trees and because there's too big a tariff on it. Well, if Donald Trump wants to get rid of the tariffs on softwood lumber, then there's a whole lot of Canadians and Canadian workers that I used to work for who would be very happy to see that happen. Those are American tariffs on softwood lumber, and it's the donors of the Republican and Democrat parties that make sure those tariffs exist. So, like, Donald Trump doesn't understand the facts. So it's all well and good that these guys are both studying up or have always known it, and I don't deny either one of those two things. But it's going to be about who people actually think have their back in that fight.
Yeah.
Okay, but you also said that if Mark Carney can bring Canadians along to that point of view, and to Cole's point, Mark Carney is not a politician, and
Nope.
and I know there's an answer line to that, but ultimately, when you're on the hustings, you have to prove that you can step up, and is that going to be a problem for Mark Carney if he's never had to prove himself on that level before?
Well, he's proven himself as the governor of the Bank of Canada, and he's proven himself when he worked at finance in the finance department for Paul Martin and the governor of the Bank of England. He is not a career politician. He's never going to be a career politician unless he gets reelected several times. He's not going to be a slick soundbite machine. That's not what he's going to do. Pierre Poilievre will come out with his boxing gloves. He'll drop them and try some bare-fisted stuff, I'm sure. I think Carney can do the sparring that he needs to, but he's an economist. He's been a central banker. He's someone who is kind of the steady, calm, reassuring hand we need to lead the country. And Canadians have lost faith in their career politicians, and I think a breath of fresh air is a breath of credible experience. Fresh air is what the country's looking for.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, when I look at the Liberal leadership results from last night in terms of the riding breakdown, there was only about 17 ridings where Mark Carney got about 1,000 votes, and a lot of those areas overlap with the 2011 30-person caucus. So I think the support is concentrated in Canada's cities, and it's going to be interesting to watch Mark Carney try to advocate for a fourth term for the Liberals and bring a fresh coat of paint to, an old busted down vehicle that the Canadian public has a lot of problems with. So we're going to have to see if you can actually campaign and keep up with Poilievre, particularly in a debate.
Okay. And George?
Well, I'm not going to deny where the NDP sits right now in the polls, and I'll be very real about that. But again, like you're dealing with an untested Mark Carney, who, frankly, if we all closed our eyes and pictured to what a prime minister should look like, and much of us wouldn't like to admit it, but it's somebody that looks like Mark Carney. So he's got that going for him. But I think also, does he actually connect? And yes, we have an experienced politician, but he's experienced and disliked. And the more people get to know him, the more they dislike him in Pierre Poilievre. So I do think there's an opportunity, if these guys, again, can fight over either the policy or over who's worse than the other, there is an opportunity for the NDP to take that ground of who's got your back. I know it's going to be a challenge, and it's something that Jagmeet's struggled with in the past, but I think this opportunity, you watch this debate go on, and I think there's an opportunity for the NDP to say, these guys are fighting for politics, we want to fight for you.
Mm-hmm. An opportunity, as you say, and we talked about it last night, where we expect that Mark Carney will move very quickly in terms of getting an election writ dropped and an election called. But I do want to do one more go around here as to whether or not you think it is advantageous for your individual parties, whether it be a short or a long campaign. What do you think, Susan?
Liberals, I think, get into the campaign as quickly as they can. The Conservatives have a big war chest to spend, and everybody has the same rules come election spending so soon. I don't think a 72-day campaign like Stephen Harper did in 2015 is the way to go. I think 30 days, more or less, is the way to do it.
Okay, so a short campaign. Cole?
I think on the Conservative side, we've been in campaign mode basically for the last 2 years. I think, the membership, the volunteers, the staff are ready to hit the ground running and salivating for a chance to actually campaign. Now that we know who the Liberal leader is, we know who all the players are in the field, like everyone's ready to play the game now.
Okay, George?
Well, I mean, frankly, I know there's always talk about the NDP is never ready for an election campaign, but I've been doing this a long time, and we're never ready, including in 2011. What does happen for the NDP during a campaign is the ground gets leveled, basically. So, like, the four main leaders in Quebec, or the three main across the country, get kind of equal coverage, at least in the media, in a bigger way than we usually do. So I think campaign is good for the NDP. I will say quickly that I think there's value for Mark Carney, frankly, when he's negotiating as Prime Minister, for the House to have made some kind of decision together, for the parties to officially have said, we're behind we're united, we're going to fight this fight with the tariffs. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think there would be value in the House sitting briefly with an understanding that it's like a day or whatever to vote that through, show unity, and then go to the campaign. It's not going to happen, but I think it'd be good.
The Conservatives would never do that. I think what we have with the Premiers united, in the absence of the House of Commons passing a motion showing some kind of consensus, which I think in the current climate is actually impossible, with the Premiers united, under a new Prime Minister, and the country's united. I mean, I think Canadians feel united. The elbows up and the demonstrations on Parliament Hill, and whether you boo or you sing the Canadian anthem really loudly or the American anthem with a boo, I think we are united in a way, and he'll have the mandate and I think the trust of Canadians. But it'd be good to get an election over with and then have a Prime Minister who's leading.
Okay, but very quickly, short, what's for the NDP?
I mean, I would never want to live a 78-day campaign ever again. So my vote's always for short, no matter what.
Okay, just for convenience, everyone's on side for the short campaign. Okay, Susan Cole, George, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, Mark Carney did win the Liberal leadership in a landslide yesterday, walking away with nearly 86% of the available points to secure the top job. And today, the polling firm Pollara has a new survey out, one that says Carney has a big lead over Pierre Poilievre as the best federal leader to take on Donald Trump. Dan Arnold is a former pollster for the last 3 Liberal campaigns, these days Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara. Dan, good to see you again.
Happy to be here.
So, you know, we know that Mark Carney, the mere mention of his name has lifted Liberal numbers when it comes to the polls. But you've actually done, you and Pollara have actually done a head-to-head comparison of Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. And when it comes to competency, what are you finding here?
Yeah, so we tested about 20 different attributes comparing Carney to Poilievre, how Canadians feel different terms describe them. And yeah, the things where Carney has the biggest advantage are on things that are very managerial. It's on competency. He's got a 14-point lead, can handle difficult situations. He's got a 13-point lead, managing the economy, 18-point lead. So the things that you would expect, you know, a banker to be good at. It's kind of, you know, in politics, it's the first impression, it's the job description, it's how you look. And he kind of looks like somebody who is competent, who has his act together. And I think that's where a lot of the appeal for him is coming from right now with Canadians. They think they want a serious person at this time, and he looks like a serious person.
Okay, serious person, in large part due to Donald Trump, which, you know, you speak to people, that is what they believe the ballot question is going to be. Do you believe Trump is the ballot question? And when it comes to Carney, what have you found vis-a-vis Trump?
Yeah, I think it feels like Trump is the ballot question. And maybe Trump will become a wallflower for the next 2 months and disappear. That seems unlikely. So I'm assuming that Trump is going to be in the news. And it seems like that's all Canadians are paying attention to right now. And, you know, it comes down to kind of who they want in charge to deal with the Trump fallout. On the same just kind of head-to-head, right now we've got Carney with a 14-point lead in terms of who Canadians feel between Carney and Poilievre. They trust to deal with Trump. But part of that is because, you know, I think there's some unease about whether or not Poilievre would actually go along with Trump or stand up to him. We asked a separate question about, you know, for each of these leaders, do you think they would do what Trump wants, or do you think they would stand up to Trump? You know, for Carney, you've got 44% say they think he'd stand up to Trump. Only 70% say they think he'd go along with Trump. So more than twice as many say stand up to Trump. For Poilievre, it's flipped. You have more people who say he's just going to do what Trump wants as opposed to he'll stand up to him. So yeah, it's a big. Poilievre's got a big Trump problem right now. And when the ballot question was cost of living was changed a year ago, everything was working for Pierre Poilievre. But now that the board has been shaken up by Donald Trump and the ballot question has changed, he's obviously scrambling and trying to figure out how he fits into this new game board that they're playing on.
Yeah, although what's interesting about Carney, and no news to anybody, you know, yes, people might know him as the Bank of Canada governor, but he has no track record as a politician. He hasn't really been tested as a politician, and I think what's telling, even though people believe he would push back more against Trump than would a Poilievre, and that's what your study has found, there's still a large chunk of Canadians that still don't know and ask that question about Carney. How much of that is a potential pitfall for the leader and the Liberal Party?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big wild card for the election, right? Like, people love the idea of Mark Carney right now. I don't think they know a lot about Mark Carney. We asked in the survey, you know, do you know a couple things about these politicians? You've got under half of Canadians right now who say they know a couple things about Mark Carney. So that's the majority of Canadians. Maybe they know his name, they know his former job title. That's about it. So, you know, in an election campaign, when there's attack ads and there's, you know, controversy swirling and debates, and like, people will get to know a lot more about him. And if, you know, if the idea of Mark Carney that they have in their heads right now is what they see on the campaign trail. I think that lines up very good for him and good for the Liberal Party. But if what they see on the campaign trail is very different from this idea they have in their head, if he doesn't kind of live up to the hype, those numbers could change very quickly. When you have an untested politician, there's a potential for a great result. There's also potential for things to really go south quickly in a campaign.
Yeah, and as you say, that is the wild card here. Although I do want to ask about, Pierre Poilievre, because these head-to-head comparisons, we're talking about the areas where Mark Carney has actually come up ahead of the Conservative leader. Where has the Conservative leader, in any area, I wonder, has come ahead of the Liberal leader?
So there's not a lot of areas right now where Poilievre, or really any areas where Poilievre is ahead of Carney. Where there is basically a tie is on things that are more about kind of relatability and connecting with voters. So do they understand what I'm going through, cares about people like me? And again, like Carney, the image people have of him is probably as this banker guy. Does he understand what my life is like? Does he understand what I'm going through? I think that's a bit of a wild card right now. People don't necessarily know that. For Poilievre, certainly on something like getting rid of the carbon tax, they believe he's going to do that. But I think both of them need to kind of do a bit more in terms of connecting with voters and showing they understand what voters are going through. And that's maybe an area where there's some opportunities for Poilievre, just because Carney's not as, seen as strong in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Now, to be fair, you and I are having this conversation as if it's a two-horse race, between Liberal and Conservatives. Are we discounting, are Canadians discounting the Bloc and the NDP too soon?
Yeah, based on polling right now, they seem to have drifted into kind of the background of this discussion, and I think that's the big challenge Jagmeet Singh has right now, is that the conversation for the past month has been Trump, and then therefore Poilievre and Carney, how they're reacting to Trump. And the risk for certainly the NDP and maybe even the Bloc to some extent is that this kind of becomes a two-person race, and that's the battle that everyone pays attention to, and they become a bit of an afterthought in the campaign. That said, again, when we're talking about areas where Carney's weaker, like understands what people are going through, cares about me, those are traditional NDP strengths. So maybe if Carney looks a little stiff and doesn't get what regular people are going through in a campaign, maybe that's something the NDP can kind of find some space to get in on and get some momentum on. But yeah, right now, based on all the polls that are out there, the NDP is getting squeezed right now.
Okay. Dan Arnold, thank you for sharing the details of this new poll.
Happy to be here.
And that is our program for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.